All right, everyone, welcome to a special episode of Around the Bird Bath. As always, I'm your host, Dan Nerdahl, and this episode is going to be all about the 2024 American Athletic Conference Tournament Championship. If you saw in the show notes or the little episode description and the editor's note by Jared, I had to kind of call an audible, no pun intended, with this being Alamo Audible, but had to call an audible with just the crazy weather that the Houston folks experienced, and hope that all of our Roadrunner faithful down in the Houston area and everyone in Houston is doing all right as they work to restore power and just clean up with the storms that came in later last week. Jared is one of the ones who still is without power while we're recording this, and of course the tournament's starting on Tuesday, so wanted to still be able to get it out soon enough for you to listen to it and everything. I think for Jared, for their house, it's very minimal damage. A little damage to the fence area, but no major damage. But still without power, and so that's why you didn't hear the music lead up. We won't do a cumbia break. Kind of just a raw cut episode of my thoughts, and again, because of Jared not having the power, hopped on and bringing this to you solo, and gonna be looking at kind of the we'll re-summarize who the teams are in the conference, what day one looks like, Tuesday, May 21st. Talk about who in the conference overachieved in conference play, who underachieved. Mention briefly at-large teams and what that means for everyone else. And then talk about the tournament, the location, the format, some aspects of the format that benefit UTSA, UTSA's path, pros and cons, and then kind of conclude the episode with what you can expect from Alamo Audible and Around the Bird Bath for coverage this week, and in what form we hope to bring that to you. I had plans to go down to Florida. A couple things changed. Not able to make the trip this year. This time, Adrian is down there. He's actually, already had a prearranged trip with his family set up, so he might be at a game on Tuesday. I'll have to check with his schedule and everything, but definitely going to be keeping you informed. So stay up to date on my Twitter, Alamo Audible's Twitter, and of course wherever you find your podcast. Before we get into kind of the tournament aspect, I wanted to take a couple quick moments to talk about UTSA's 2024 season. Definitely going to go more in depth with it whenever I do kind of my end of season podcast and senior tribute. Hopefully that's not for a while longer. We'll see how this week goes, but I had said at the start of the season, I truly thought they could reach 40 wins for the first time in program history. They still could. It would require, winning the conference tournament and then even winning a couple regional games, if not making it to supers at this point. 32-22. I think for the tournament, the most games they can win is 5. If that could be either playing 2 on Saturday if they have to beat a team twice on Saturday, or if they lose the first game and then win the tournament. I think that would give them 5 games, and so if they did that could get them to 37, and then a regional could give them that opportunity to reach 40 wins. But At this point, with the 32-22, reaching a regional would be the only thing that would give them a chance to actually reach the 40 wins, not just get close to it. But, I think it's a reminder of just, like, it's a good thing to have the program reach 30 wins and feel a little disappointed. It shows that this program has shown that they can win ball games, that Coach Hallmark and his staff can put a good product on the field, and they can find ways to get strong quality play out of their players, and they can battle. I think if you ask a lot of people after the first month of the season, I don't know if they would have been running to the betting lines to put down odds on winning 30 plus games before the conference tournament. They started the conference tournament off on a really good start, taking down the champs, even this year's regular season champs, the ECU Pirates, in the first series of the season. And they still only lost 2 series all season. I know fans are disappointed about that, and then you see how the standings finished with UTSA just 2 games back from ECU. And a lot of what ifs, maybe, especially those 2 series they lost. But they still battled in games that they lost, and they still fought hard, and they still gave themselves opportunities to where they could have maybe ended up with a win. So, they definitely won some games that maybe, looking down on the schedule, you didn't think they'd win. They definitely lost some games you really didn't think they'd lose, and that's a lot of why they're sitting at 32-22 and maybe not 36-18 or 37-17. But all they can do now is focus on the tournament, and with where things are at, it's a win or go home situation for everyone outside of ECU. And I won't say it's a clean slate in the sense that, like, matchups still matter, how guys are playing now, either if they're slumping or if they're on a hot streak, matter. But it is a clean slate in the sense that the seeds are determined. All of these teams have shown that anybody can beat anybody, and it's not a series. Like, there's it's double elimination. There's no series the way, like, regionals or super regionals and Omaha can offer those. And so that means that if you face a team that maybe you didn't do as well against, like, you gotta hope that you churn out that better game that you offered in that weekend series, or that you don't get, you can have a weekend series where you don't score till the 5th or 6th inning, and maybe you lose by 3 or 4, and it's a bummer that you lost the game. You have a game like that in the tournament, and you're either going home or you're on the loser's bracket, 1 game away from elimination. So everyone's going to be bringing their A game, and everyone's going to be playing hard, because if, like, Tulane, who's playing good baseball right now, we'll talk about them for sure. They showed last year what can happen if you play good baseball at the right time. They did not have a good record coming into the tournament, and they won the whole thing and knocked off the favorites to stamp their ticket to regional. So let's compare real quick, kind of who overachieved and underachieved from a team perspective based on 2 different preseason polls, the American Athletic Conference Coaches Poll and D1 Baseball's preseason projections. Before we do that, just one more time for good measure, here is the top 8 in seed order: East Carolina, UTSA, Tulane, Wichita, UAB, Florida Atlantic, Charlotte, Rice. Wichita State and Tulane, both 15 and 12. Tulane had the tiebreaker there. Florida Atlantic and Charlotte, both 12 and 15 in conference. Florida Atlantic had the tiebreaker there. And then Rice and South Florida, both 11 and 16, with Rice having the tiebreaker there. So South Florida, Memphis are out. Their seasons are over. Still finished with, from teams 5 through 10, just 3 games separate UAB at 13-14 and Memphis 10-17. So a lot of series where teams would come in and win a series, and then they'd go next weekend against a different team and lose a series, or get swept, or then sweep a team. But looking at the American Athletic Coaches Poll, East Carolina was picked as the favorites. Charlotte was picked second. They finished with the 7th seed, so they underperformed slightly based on that. UTSA was picked to finish 3rd. They finished 2nd, slightly above that. FAU 4, South Florida 5. Of course, South Florida finishing all the way down at 9. Actually, South Florida and Memphis were picked 5, 6 in the coaches poll, and they finished 9th and 10th. So definitely an underperformance there. Tulane, the overperformance, probably the best overperformance of anyone in the conference. They were picked 9th in the coaches poll, receiving just 25 points, and they finished all the way up in 3rd. And then Wichita State, who had the same conference record as Tulane, just lost the tiebreaker to they're the 4 seed. They were picked to finish 7th. So those are 2 teams that overperformed. And it's something where you look at those 2 teams, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but one of those teams UTSA struggled with, and one they had some good wins, struggled early a little bit in some of those games against Tulane, but gets one team on their side of the bracket and one team not on their side of the bracket. Looking at D1 Baseball's projection to order finish, D1 Baseball again was real high on Charlotte. They picked them to finish 2nd. They also projected Charlotte to be a regional team. That could still happen, but the only way that's going to happen is if Charlotte won the tournament, which, we talked about Tulane and what they did last year. Charlotte last year in Conference USA with, almost half of these teams, lost Game 1 to La Tech. Game 2 knocked UTSA out of the tournament. So I talked about that a little bit in my blog recap and the looking ahead section for this week. And, still a good amount of Roadrunner players that were on last year's team that remember that game. UTSA, after dropping the Friday game against Charlotte in the series, won the next 2 by run rule. So Charlotte's going to be wanting to get some revenge on that. So that's going to be an exciting game on Tuesday. We'll talk more about that. But that at this point, the only way Charlotte's going to honor that projected regional by D1 Baseball is if they win the tournament. Memphis picked 3rd. We talked about them already, disappointing 10th. UTSA was picked 4th in D1 Baseball, so a little lower. They went above that by finishing 2nd. Florida Atlantic was picked 5th. They were, pretty close to that when they finished 6th. UAB had a game on them. UAB was picked by D1 Baseball to finish 10th. And UAB was also picked 10th to finish in the coaches poll. So UAB, another one that overperformed, picked 10th and is the 5 seed. South Florida wasn't as highly regarded by D1 Baseball. It was close. They were 6th. D1 Baseball didn't vary too much from the coaches poll. D1 Baseball had Tulane at 8, where the coaches poll had them at 9. We just talked about them finishing on a size 3. And then Rice, the coaches poll picked Rice to make the tournament. D1 Baseball did not. Rice, of course, made the tournament on the last day, and they've got an interesting matchup. We'll talk more about that as we get into kind of looking at day one. So let's talk about at-large teams. Mentioned that briefly with Charlotte. ECU, they're the only team that has a guaranteed at-large spots. Now, they need to have a good tournament. After how they got swept against Tulane, they probably need to win the tournament to host, because right now their RPI is sitting at 16. That's from WarrenNolan.com. And if they didn't win the tournament, then that would drop again, and then especially not winning the tournament, they might still get a regional host. I think even if they win the tournament, their chances at a top 8 national seed are out the window at this point. But East Carolina is somebody that, even if they go, I don't want to say I think even if they went 0-2, they'd still make the tournament just based on their RPI and regular season champs and some of their wins. They reached 40 wins, some of their regular season wins. And they're 5-2 quad 1, 3-7 quad 2. So they've got 8 quad 1 and 2 wins. And it's still a very impressive 40-13 overall. So East Carolina is basically in. I guess crazier things have happened, but now if a team other than ECU goes and wins the tournament, then that's what we call a stolen bid, because the American Athletic Conference stole a bid from somebody else, because ECU still gets that at-large spot, but now it's a 2-bid league instead of just a 1-bid league. And that's kind of a little bit, we talk about the 2022 snub. That's kind of a little bit of what happened with UTSA, where there were a lot of conference teams that the favorites didn't win the tournament, so then a lot of stolen bids, and that resulted in UTSA even being a 38 RPI team getting left out. Maybe there's other reasons unofficial off the books, but one of the official reasons was because of those stolen bids. So definitely something to keep an eye on in terms of across the country, just from a college baseball sickos perspective, to see who gets those at-large bids and who don't. Because 64 teams make the tournament, but 30 of those spots go to the conference champions. And so there's really only 34 at-large spots. SEC is going to get more than a handful. ACC is going to get more than a handful. Big 12 is going to get a few. Pac-12 is probably still going to get a couple. And so really when you think about outside of the power teams, how many at-large spots there are, and there's not that many. And that's what makes it such a difficult path when you're a mid-major and your RPI is just not really there. Tournament, if you don't know by now, is going to be in Clearwater, Florida at Big-Hair Ballpark. It's actually where the Phillies single A team plays, and you might have seen on the socials. It's kind of neat. Simon Miller is playing for the Daytona Tortugas right now, the Reds single A team, and Daytona was in Clearwater, and so the UTSA baseball team got to go to the stadium, talk with Simon for a few minutes, maybe catch the game. And I don't know if Simon pitched or not. They've been using him a lot in kind of that late relief role. 1 inning pitched, maybe an inning and 2/3 innings pitched. But most of his appearances so far this season have just been an inning. And you can look up his stats on baseballreference.com and see how he's doing. But, has been hit hard a couple times. At the same time, strikeouts still look good, and getting his feet wet in his first full season of professional baseball. So that's great to see. Format, talked about this a little bit already, but it's a double elimination tournament. No first round buys. Now, they do have, because they start on Tuesday, and because they start on Tuesday, they have 2 buys built in, or not buys, but days off. They have 2 days off built in as long as you keep winning. So if you win day 1 on Tuesday, then you get Wednesday off. If you win on Thursday, so then you improve to 2-0 in the tournament, you get Friday off. And then Saturday, you're in the driver's seat because you got a team coming in. You got a team coming in who's already lost a game. So now they've got to take 2 out of 3 from you. And if you can manage to win the first game on Saturday and not need the second game, then, or I guess, excuse me, not 2 out of 3, but they've got to take two in a row from you. But if you can still, if you can come into Saturday being 2-0 and then win the first game on Saturday, now you're sitting on Sunday, Championship Sunday, and you could have your number 1 starter available again and should be fresh on 5 days rest, and so, or full rest. So a little different than Conference USA, and definitely motivation to win that first day, but also win that second day, because then you're playing, 3 baseball games in a few days. You're not playing every single day. Even if you lose day 1, but then win on Wednesday, then you would get Thursday off. So even if there are still opportunities to have a day off, which is helpful for your bullpen and just your hitters. And, I'm not sure what the temperature is going to be like down in Clearwater. I know I heard from some people in Boca that at start time on Saturday, it was heat index was 110. Even well into the game, it then only got dropped down to like 106 into the middle afternoon, early evening. And so, or maybe that might have been Friday, but it was hot all weekend down there. So, that's something to think about too with days off, and just being able to rest and rehydrate the body and be focused for those games. And I think that's something that benefits UTSA, because they've got some depth with pitching. They've got a lot of arms they can call on in high pressure moments. With some of those guys, the way we've seen them used and the way throughout the season, like you've seen similar guys called upon in situations. I don't know how deep that depth is from a high leverage perspective, but the nice thing about having those potential off days built in is it allows you to have a more disposal of your bullpen weapons. And I thought maybe, and I guess this could still happen, but I thought maybe they would pitch Yuli game 2. I think with the off day on Wednesday, they'll definitely throw Yuli in game 1 on Tuesday, mostly because since game 2 wouldn't be till Thursday, then there's no way Yuli could be full rest for if UTSA makes the championship on Sunday. He throws Tuesday, he gets Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday off. Sunday would be his 5th day, and he could be ready to go. You could have a lot of your bullpen, because you have the potential to get there in 3 games. And I'm not trying at all to get too far ahead of ourselves. We know from last year what this tournament can be like. I'm just looking at how the schedule's set up. And I think it benefits UTSA, because you played 2 games 2 days in a row, those first 2 days, and now you're really having to be creative on your bullpen, who you use, how long you use them, how you set up. And not to mention, if you're playing those first 2 days, that means you lost on Tuesday, and now you lose again, and like there's no room for error, of course. So,
Sorry, could you say that again?
so I like the format for UTSA, and just where their strengths are at, and I think it's a good there's a good opportunity there for them to get really creative with how they use their pitching and how they use maybe more of their bullpen guys that are throwing a little better right now. So let's look at UTSA's path to Championship Sunday, and just their path in the tournament. Same side of the bracket as UTSA. Of course, number 7 Charlotte, number 6 Florida Atlantic, and number 3 Tulane. Number 1 East Carolina, number 8 Rice, number 4 Wichita State, number 5 UAB are all on the opposite side of the bracket. And there's some brackets out there, like the SEC's one, where it kind of gets crazy with 12 teams in there. And if you lose, you can kind of flip-flop to the other side and everything. The American Athletic doesn't have that. They have a straight-up 8-team double elimination bracket, and so you've got your 4 teams on the top, your 4 teams on the bottom. One team comes out of both of those, and you play a one-game winner-take-all on Sunday. And the thing about, you look at the opposite side of the bracket with East Carolina, Rice, UAB, and Wichita, two of the teams that UTSA lost series against this season are on the opposite side, Rice and Wichita State, and the number 1, East Carolina, is on the opposite side as well. It's interesting just talking about that bracket real quick. Wichita State, although they dropped a game against Memphis on Saturday, and that's what put them on as the 4 seed, they're playing all year they played good baseball, and I have to eat crow a little bit in the conference tournament, in the conference preview. I think I said, I don't know if I'd worry about Wichita State too much, and they definitely showed out and played good baseball, taking the series against UTSA and earning the 4 seed. So they're a dangerous team. They're a dangerous 4 seed. Mentioned last year, with UTSA like having the 2 seed and Charlotte having the 3 seed, I thought Charlotte was a really dangerous 3 seed, and we saw what happened with that. So, I would keep an eye on Wichita State throughout the week, and they've got to get past a UAB team with some good pitching. Wichita State, their pitcher Lepore just got pitcher of the week this week for the American. But I think if there was a team on the top bracket that could knock off ECU, it would be Wichita State. Rice, the one thing about Rice that, and by knock off I mean, a team outside of ECU that can make the championship game. Because the thing about Rice, Rice kind of got smacked around this weekend by East Carolina, and then even on Saturday, in Game 2 on Saturday, because they played a doubleheader, Rice was out to an early lead and East Carolina came back. It's tough to beat a baseball team 4 games in a row, especially at this level. And I think if I had to pick somebody, I'm still picking East Carolina, because it seems like, at least offensively, they've got things figured out. I think their pitching might still be a little beat up, but that would be another game where I'm like, okay, don't overlook that, because Rice might be like, all right, we've lost 3 in a row, let's figure this out, and they could they could upset East Carolina. And last year, East Carolina lost Game 1, I think it was to South Florida in the tournament, 11-10 or 12-11. So it's gonna be a crazy week. Now, looking at UTSA's side, they won their series against each team on their side 2-1 versus Charlotte, 2-1 versus Florida Atlantic, and they swept Tulane, their only conference sweep of the year. So they are 7-2 against their side of the bracket. But again, don't to use a cliche term, don't eat the cheese and think, oh, they've got an easy path. Each of these teams gave them tough games. Florida Atlantic, outside of Thursday, Florida Atlantic really limited the run production that UTSA put forth. They gave up 14 runs on Thursday, but then they only gave up 7 the rest of the weekend. And one of those 7 runs came in extra innings on a catcher's interference, bases loaded catcher's interference call. And so Florida Atlantic, they dropped the series, but could have very easily won the series. Charlotte, that was the one where, UTSA should have won Friday. They didn't. And then they kind of showed, at least for that weekend, how they were the better team by just run ruling Charlotte. But you also don't want to overlook that. Like last year, and this is a very different team in a lot of ways, but just from history perspective, last year UTSA swept a Middle Tennessee State team rather convincingly in the regular season, and then Middle shut them down in game 1, and a pitcher that UTSA hit well against in the series found his groove and really shut down UTSA's offense. And then Tulane, UTSA swept Tulane, but some of those games were close at the end, and UTSA showed that, Tulane showed that they can stay in games, and Tulane swept ECU, where UTSA took 2 games. So, and they played them at different points, and there's different factors, of course, but Tulane is going to be a tough out at the 3 seed and the way they're playing right now. They took the series against Charlotte this past weekend, and they had a 16-win improvement from last season in their overall record. So, and they're going to be relying on their run last year, and they're going to use that as motivation to be like, hey, when we're counted out, we can get this done. They're not as much of an underdog this year, being the 3 seed, and everyone's kind of all right, on Tulane alert. But I guess what I'm getting at is I don't want UTSA's side of the bracket at all to seem like it's a cakewalk just because they did well against these teams in the regular season. Because we've seen how, at times, up and down, UTSA's offense can be. Perfect example, they run rule Incarnate Word on Tuesday. They run rule FAU on Thursday, scoring 28 runs between those 2 games. And then they only score 7 runs the next 2 games and leave 20 runners on in those 2 games with several strikeouts. So it's just going to come down to the teams that show up and show out and put it together at the right time. I think there's probably, outside, you've got the favorite at ECU, but outside of ECU, I think you've got, I'll say 2 or 3 teams that could have an honest shot at winning this. UTSA, Wichita, Tulane, maybe even throw FAU in there if their pitchers can, stay solid. But I think the Sunday matchup, at least one of the 2 teams has the potential to be kind of an outlier, like somebody you didn't expect. And we'll just see exactly how it unfolds. All right. So, as the listeners, what can you expect for coverage from Alamo Audible this week? I think it's going to be kind of fluid. It will depend on just how things go with the situation in Houston, and as Jared tries to get power back, and the much bigger issues, real world issues going on in Houston, and important things going on there. But the goal, is to, I think I liked last year doing as hard as it was after the first game, especially the second game. I enjoyed kind of those hot take, hot reaction. Last year we did it as an audio video or an audio clip, put it up on the podcast feed, just to have my quick thoughts from the game, and then a quick look ahead at like who UTSA's next opponent is. I think that's probably going to be the main format for this week. If things get crazy and UTSA finds themselves in like a championship Sunday, maybe we drop an emergency podcast and come up with something. But I think what you can definitely rely on is the post-game reactions with some quick down dirty thoughts, some takeaways, looking at the next opponent, and then I'll do my best to give updates on the rest of the field throughout the week as I watch and as I try to watch with different things going on. But and it'd be a much more toned down live update version, maybe every couple every couple of innings, and just here's the score, and then check in again, and then a final score and who they play next, and when teams get eliminated, maybe so and so's been eliminated. So if you don't want to jump around a lot, you can check my Twitter page out for those. But of course, a lot of other ways to get information about the tournament. But with that, we'll wrap up here. Want to give a big thanks again for all of your support this season, listening, kind words in person, the kind words on Twitter, and just following along. Hopefully we're not done yet. Hopefully it's a good week, and UTSA can, it was 30 years ago that they made their first regional appearance by winning the tournament back in 1994. They've been a few times since then, and maybe we can have some more magic, some 2024 magic, and it results in UTSA going to a regional tournament, and we can keep bringing these episodes to you for a little bit longer. But of course, all of this is possible with our Patreon supporters at all tiers, but especially our Board of Trustees members, Digiteek, John Outwell, Gary and Ruben representing the UTSA Bird Gang Tailgate, Ray Redding and Mimi Papero, Brandon Grill and the Grill Realty Group, Andy Elzalde and Proficient Benefit Solutions, Ian McClendon and Seeker LLC, Ryan Squires, Waterman Construction, Javon Townsend, VP of the DFW chapter of the UTSA Alumni Association, UTSA Annual Giving, Arson Vapor and CBD, Wayne Gonzalez and Runners Rising Project, and of course our big money donors, Ben Tovar, the Bunch family, Zach Espericueta and the San Antonio Podcast Network, Alejandro Benavides, Jacob Cavazos, board president for the UTSA Alumni Association, John Nally, Brandon Padron, Rick Cortez of Rowdy Road Growers, and Sumner McDaniel. So thank you to those supporters, and thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, and let's hope for a good week. Birds up.